everybody. My name is Todd Kincaid. I'm the Executive Director for Project Baseline. We're a nonprofit 501c3 organization in the United States dedicated to conservation, promoting conservation of the underwater world. Our motto is Explore, Document, Protect. And the reason that motto is, we have that motto is try to capitalize on the exploration spirit that I think all of us as divers have embraced to various levels, and then encourage divers to memorialize what they see instead of it just becoming our own individual memories. Memorialize what we see in terms of documentation, such that we can develop a memory of how the underwater world is changing through time. And if we can do that, then hopefully we can inspire better protection of those underwater environments. So what I'm going to be talking about today is our organization, Project Baseline, what we do, a little bit about how we do it, and I'm going to start out with where we came from. So where we came from was a place that's near and dear to my heart. We'll call it Springs, Florida. That's one of the largest freshwater springs in the world. It's located in the panhandle of Florida, south of the capital city of Tallahassee. You're talking about where we evolved from was a period of exploration that extended from about 1995 through about 2009, 2010. It's I'm biased, but I think it's one of the coolest diving exploration projects that there has ever been. As of now, the exploration there has resulted in mapping 52 kilometers, 31 miles for those of us stuck with imperial units, 52 kilometers of mapped tunnels. It's the longest underwater cave in North America. Those mapped tunnels span 15 kilometers or 9 miles of the Florida panhandle. If we think about or talk about the conduits that we've mapped with in a combination of diving, exploration, and groundwater tracing or dye tracing, we can extend that to 35 kilometers or 21 miles across the Florida panhandle from basically the city of Tallahassee all the way to the coast of Gulf of Mexico. Prior to 2002, so right about the middle of this exploration period that divers were actively engaged in exploring the cave system, resource managers and scientists didn't even believe that these caves existed. Certainly that if they did exist, they were anywhere near as significant or large and extensive as what we knew them to be. What was happening with Wakulla at this time of exploration was that the spring had become heavily polluted, nutrient pollution resulting in a process or in a condition called eutrophication, which basically means that algae had grown to overwhelm just about everything in the spring basin, choking out almost all other forms of life. We observed that dramatic change occurring in just the span of 10 to 15 years. But what was really disheartening was to see that visitors coming to Wakulla Springs would still comment about how beautiful the now emerald green waters were. And as divers, we of course knew that it really wasn't beautiful and that it was heavily degraded. So that was what was happening at Wakulla Springs. Scientists, the policies at the time were failing to protect the spring. The spring was continuing to get worse. They had not been able to identify the source of the nutrient contamination, and therefore not take any steps to abate that contamination or stop it. And I believe, as a scientist myself, that it stemmed from bad assumptions. Basically, scientists and resource managers assumed that there were no such thing as caves, and they assumed that groundwater was flowing very slowly. But if we look at what cave divers were doing at the time, they were creating these maps. They were mapping these caves and demonstrating that you could, I mean, literally could swim 15 kilometers across the basin. So groundwater was flowing very fast, sometimes so fast that it was hard for the divers to swim or even ride scooters against it. So as divers, we knew that these caves existed. We knew that water was flowing very fast, but the problem is that we weren't telling anybody. And a lot of what was happening and a lot of this information that was being collected and knowledge was being gained about the caves in Florida, Wakulla Springs in particular, wasn't leaving the cave diving community, which is a tiny community within a tiny community of divers. Even if we think of divers around the world, we're such a tiny group of people that if we can't get the knowledge out into the broader public, then the things that we learn and the things that we see can't possibly make much of a difference. So, so right around the year 2000, 2001, as divers, we decided to start engaging with the public, to start not only giving presentations or talking about making maps for other cave divers to see and for us to compete against each other in terms of groups that were trying to make explorations into Wakulla Springs, but to reach out and share this information with the general public, with the people that had no idea of what literally was beneath their feet. These public presentations, we called it Exploring the Secrets of Wakulla Springs, and it started as just small presentations at community education programs, like an organization or a program called the Wakulla Wildlife Festival. From there, we met people that got excited about what we were able to show. We started another nonprofit organization called the Wakulla Springs Alliance. Those presentations went from reaching and talking to maybe 5 or 6 people at these yearly events to standing room only standing room only events in downtown Tallahassee at like the convention center, where we'd have hundreds of people show up with press and media coverage. And, it was just amazing to watch and see how well the community responded to learning about what was in their backyard. We did workshops where we participated with other scientists and regulators to show them where we knew the caves existed, to share our maps, share videos and pictures and data like temperature data and things that we were collecting from the caves. We participated in and led field trips with community groups, with scientists, regulators, politicians, participated in advisory meetings, working group meetings, and were even invited to lecture to the governor's cabinet and educate, high-level politicians in the state of Florida about what was happening at this major spring, one of the largest state parks and tourist attractions in the natural tourist attractions in the state of Florida. So there was an enormous amount of response once we, as divers, simply decided to get out and share what we knew. That interest inspired additional investigations. Personally, as I said, I'm a scientist, and I was lucky to be a part of this ongoing amount of research. We installed tubing so that samples could be collected from different specific locations in the cave. We engaged in dye tracing experiments, and we established meters, made better maps and even three-dimensional models of the cave system. Wakulla became the most instrumented cave that I know of, but I believe it was the most instrumented underwater cave in the entire world. 7 stations where temperature and conductivity were being measured at 15-minute intervals, and I believe are still being measured to this day, years and decades later, producing records of change through time of water chemistry and water quality conditions in the cave system. And then we also engaged in dye tracing experiments, which were really fascinating. Again, if we think about where we were in the early 2000s, The dominant scientific beliefs were that caves didn't exist and that groundwater travels very slowly. In 2002, we did our first dye tracing experiment where the dye traveled 1.2 miles in 56 hours, so traveled half a mile a day, connecting Fisher Creek to the Wakulla cave system and the Leon Sinks system. The next year, we came back and did it from another swallet called Black Creek, again, half a mile a day. 2004, we demonstrated definitively that the Leon Sinks cave system was connected to Wakulla Springs, answering some long-held questions in the diving community and inspiring continued exploration that ultimately connected them. But this time we tracked the flow at even faster, 1.2 miles per day. 2004, we established a connection between a major swallet that received over half of the city of Tallahassee stormwater runoff and showed that it connected to Wakulla Springs. And here we're getting velocities of, very fast velocities, traveled 6 miles in 3 weeks. 2005, we were asked to repeat the test and basically verified that it did the same thing. And then finally, in 2006, we definitively connected the wastewater spray field, the largest source of nutrient contamination to the groundwater, to the aquifer in the basin, to Wakulla Springs in just a matter of travel times in just a matter of a couple of months. So all of this work stemmed, I believe very strongly that it stemmed from that initial diving actions of divers, simply to show people what they could not otherwise see, which is what was beneath the water surface. Diver action led to press, which led to better science, which led to more press, and then ultimately led to this, what I think of as results. We call it the $250 million breakthrough curve, because once we established that dye traced connection between the wastewater spray field and Wakulla Springs, the city of Tallahassee agreed and invested in $250 million in upgrades to their wastewater treatment system that has definitively resulted in a reduction in the nitrate level at Wakulla Springs and inarguably cleaner water at the spring. So here, the idea was very stark and clear that divers had the ability to affect these major changes in the quality and the state of protection in the environments that we care very much about. Using that, you might think to yourself, okay, well, that's Wakulla, but how does that affect my area, or how does it affect where I live? Well, this problem of eutrophication is a global problem. This map shows the distribution of sites that are heavily impacted by eutrophication across the world. The yellow dots are locations that are in some state of eutrophication or eutrophic, meaning they're becoming depleted in oxygen and being overwhelmed with algae and bacteria. The red dots are locations where the water is devoid of oxygen, meaning that nothing can basically live there. So you can see that it's a global problem. It's not just springs. We think if you are paying attention at all to the press in the not too distant past, you've heard unfortunately, with increasing frequency over increasingly large areas, things like harmful algae blooms, dead zones, fish kills, red tides. This picture in the background is a picture of Peacock Springs in 2012, where you can see that the spring is just literally overwhelmed with algae that has in there because of the nutrient load is so excessive. Where does it come from? All this problem of eutrophication, it comes from pollution, primarily from sewage and fertilizers. So basically anywhere that there's intensive agriculture, anywhere where there's significant population centers that are discharging sewage are impacted by eutrophication. It's not just the springs, like I said, but also oceans, lakes, and rivers. everything ultimately dies, and it's basically bad news, right? So what can we do about it? It boils down to what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in one that looks like this? It's a picture of Eutrophication Springs, Florida, 1995. Or do we want to live in one that looks like this, which is exactly the same location in Eutrophication Springs in 2012? So that's the contrast. Do we want to live in a place that has healthy reefs like Abaco, the Outer Banks of the Bahamas, or do we want to live in a place like the entire east coast of Florida, where over 95% of the living coral has died as a result of warming temperatures and eutrophication? Project Baseline, we started this organization in 2009 because we saw what could happen as well through our work at Wakulla Springs. And we realized that this same process could be repeated anywhere. It could be repeated by any divers anywhere in the world. Our mission is to record change in the world's underwater environments, to show the public what's happening beneath the waves, and to encourage divers to engage with scientific, conservation, and government entities to advance the pace of restoration and protection. Where we're working right now, Project Baseline is a global network of divers. We have over 300 active divers that are participating in over 40 countries. Every one of these countries that is painted in blue is a location where we have active Project Baseline teams, or people being actively trying to document and engage in their underwater environments. What we have done is built a database, a global database for underwater conditions. So those 317 divers working in 41 countries are submitting pictures, they're submitting temperature data, submitting water clarity data. In some cases, they're collecting other more specific forms of data like pH or dissolved oxygen, or they're conducting video transects and doing fish counts. You name it, there's many different types of ways that people are engaging in the effort to document the underwater world. We're trying to capture that information and preserve it in a way that is accessible. This is a picture from our database that you can find at projectbaseline.org. So anybody can go there and see what's happening and what's going on across the world, and they can see and hopefully learn how to participate. How do you get involved? How can you, or how can any diver explore, document, and protect? At the most simple level, it really involves no more than 6 tasks added to any one of your dives. We ask people to take pictures of the underwater environment, to keep those pictures focused on identifiable features, in other words, on the environment, as opposed to on their dive buddies or any kind of diving equipment, but on the actual environment. Make those pictures as reproducible as possible, keeping in mind that the overall goal is to record change through time. Record the location of the sites or stations that you're documenting using GPS or Google Earth or charts or whatever other mechanism you can think of that can record the location. Record the temperature and visibility too, if that's practicable, and send those pictures and the observations to us so that we can add them to the database. Ultimately, our goal is to create a platform where if you get involved, you and your friends can leverage the work that you do that will be published through the Project Baseline platform to engage with other people, with other entities working in your community to protect and advance restoration and protection efforts. Hopefully, in the end, the goal is to create your own Wakulla Springs story. Why pictures? Well, the saying goes, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, the way I like to think of it, this is a great anecdote for me. A friend and colleague of mine, his name is Brian Lapointe, works at a place called Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute outside of Fort Pierce, Florida. And Brian's been working on eutrophication of Florida's coral reefs for more than 20 years, documenting the decline of the coral reef colonies. And his work has definitively tied that to wastewater disposals, wastewater moving out onto the coral reefs. There are at least 5 major outfalls, which is a picture of what you see here, where wastewater is being pumped out onto the reef. And so for years, Brian did great scientific work to document how this wastewater was resulting in degradation of the reefs. But it wasn't until a person from his team shared a picture of the outfall with the Los Angeles Times that it really started to make progress. So once that picture left the scientific community, left the diving community, and was shared with the public, they actually started to see change and they started to see engagement. I read somewhere that we only protect what we love and we only love what we can see. And I think that speaks volumes in terms of the potential value of the pictures that we as divers can collect and share with the world. I'll give you a little overview of some of what our teams are doing. Like I said, we have over 100 teams working in 40 countries. Obviously not going to go over all those teams, but kind of show you how some of our teams have set themselves up. This is a team called, they organized themselves in Bonaire, and they created their own nonprofit organization called Reef Renewal Project in Bonaire. And basically they're working to rebuild coral reefs, growing and repopulating elkhorn and staghorn corals. And if you go to their project on Project Baseline, you can see through pictures how their work has been progressing. And you can literally see how reefs are being rebuilt. In my own backyard, a friend of mine, Martin McClellan, started a project on his favorite dive site, which is Lake Tahoe, which spans the border of Nevada and California in the United States. Martin's passion for Lake Tahoe stemmed from the visibility, which was best, I think, summed up by Mark Twain back in 1871 when he said that the water was not merely transparent, but dazzlingly and brilliantly so. Unfortunately, through 30 years of diving, Martin saw that water clarity diminish to the point where there are times when you don't even have 10 feet of visibility in the shallow waters of Lake Tahoe. Through Martin's work at Project Baseline, he connected with University of Nevada at Reno, and together they said that Martin and his Project Baseline team accomplished more for them in 2 weekends than they would have otherwise been able to do in 5 years of work on their own. So I think it speaks volumes to what the potential that we have as divers to really make a difference. Going across the continent or up to Northwest, we have a team of divers working in a place called Saanich Inlet, which is in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. They work to remove derelict fishing gear. They work to document different types of life in the underwater British Columbia. They're collaborating with essentially the government environmental protection agencies to try to document places and establish protections for the marine life there. We have another team working in Italy in a place called the Kavarner Channel, and they're working with marine biologists to record gorgonians and sea fans to, again, document underwater conditions and help the government entities establish protections and be able to delineate protected areas. And then we also have a team working in St. Lawrence River, Canada, northeastern part of North America. Here, again, this team started out just with their own dives and then connected with scientific and government organizations to engage in fish counting, so that it could help in this case, the Thousand Islands Biological Research Station be able to demonstrate how fish were being impacted by different environmental issues, and hopefully to establish more effective protection measures. There's lots of ways to get involved, and I hope after being able to talk to you that at least some of you will be inspired to check us out. Come check out our website at projectbaseline.org, and I would throw out to you that the underwater world needs a voice, and if that voice is not ours, if it's not going to be ours as divers, then whose will it be? If you decide, or if you don't get involved with Project Baseline, I hope that you do get involved in some form or another with underwater conservation. Thank you very much for your time. It's been exciting to participate in this online diving conference. It's kind of weird talking just to my screen, but I hope that we'll be able to engage with you at some point later in the future. Thanks very much, and you guys have a great rest of the conference.